Y'all know what it is.
Hey there, and welcome to an environmentally conscious episode of Eggs. Today's special guest is researcher and host of the wildly popular YouTube channel, Just Have a Think, Dave Borlas. Created in 2018 to help himself and others understand the existential problems facing our civilization in the 21st century, Just Have a Think and its more than 320,000 subscribers delve weekly into topics ranging from alternative energy to global warming, all in an effort to not simply identify the issues, but discuss potential solutions and save lives. Through an upbeat, well-produced, and easily understood take on very complex problems, Dave has managed to distill some of the greatest threats facing our planet into something that can inform, and dare I say entertain, people who might otherwise ignore the overly complex issues he explores. Here to talk about his incredible rise and success on YouTube, hot takes on the greatest environmental challenges facing us today, and how we, as individuals, and hopefully subscribers, can get involved in making the world a better place through thoughtful collaboration. Please join us in welcoming to the show, host of Just Have a Think, Dave Borlas. Hey, Dave. How are you, man?
Good, thanks. Nice to have you on. Have me on. Thank you for having me on, even. Good stuff.
Hey, that's how you know you spend too much time making your own videos, right?
Exactly.
You're welcoming yourself to other people's shows these days.
Just wanted to show you I'm human.
That's all right. We appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I think you and Mike had some opportunity to talk pre-show, but I think it's kind of a funny conversation quickly to just sort of talk about how we came to know you. I think Mike and I both came to know you through sort of similar means, but we've had a couple guests on in recent past that were to do with hydrogen as an alternative fuel and, you know, all these sorts of eco things in and around alternative energies. And for me, I had actually used your videos for research for those discussions. And so that's how I came to know you. And I think, Mike, you came in kind of through a backdoor, right?
No, through the videos as well. And then I reached out on LinkedIn, and that's how we were able to connect. But,
no, anyway, so it's really cool how sort of all these moons aligned and we were able to get together. So sure. I really appreciate you coming together for this.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, so cool. Dave, so let's give you, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to say, why don't you give us a brief background on your education and your work history, and we'll move forward from there.
Okay, well, I'm 52, so that's quite a long list. I was normally educated to sort of end of high school standard. I didn't go on to college or university immediately. I went out to work at the age of 18 and then started in retail, actually, as what they called a junior management trainee at that time. And then when I was 26, I really felt I'd missed the boat in not going to university. So I enrolled in a thing we've got over here called the Open University, which is now a world-class organization. It's got tens of thousands of students. And I did a 6-year part-time degree in a BSc honours degree in technology while I was working. And I was working at the time as a furniture technician, which is the person that takes the designs of furniture designers. It was actually a company that was owned by IKEA. So I worked for one of the sons of Ingvar Kamprad, who is the IK in IKEA, a guy called Jonas Kamprad. And I had to take the designs of Habitat's designers, the company was called Habitat, and then travel with Jonas, who was the furniture buyer. We went all around Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia and China to establish IKEA factories to find out whether we could make our Habitat's brand of furniture work in their factories. And my job was to work out the technicalities with their technicians from our designs to make them work and cost effective in factories. So I learned a lot about design for production. And this is 20 years ago, so it wasn't so much about environmental concerns then, although a lot of it was to do with waste and eliminating waste. ISO standards, ISO 9001 and ISO 14000. They're a lot about quality control and eliminating waste. I also learned an awful lot about the world because we went to some places which were fairly questionable, if I'm honest. And I saw a side of life that at the age of 26 or 27 was a real eye-opener for me. And even some of the factories we went to had child labor in them. I mean, we very quickly stopped working with those factories, but it was there and it was going on. So that was interesting. And then I had a pretty normal career in project management, mostly in retail. And then really when I was 47, so just sort of, I suppose 4 or 5 years ago, I read a book called A Farewell to Ice by a guy called Peter Wadhams, who is Professor Emeritus at Cambridge University. And he spent 40 odd years in the Arctic, literally measuring the thickness of Arctic sea ice. Sometimes from underneath, he got a lot of trips on naval submarines, and they would measure with upward looking sonar. They can measure the underside of the ice, and they can obviously discern. It's quite good, useful for them to know how thick the ice is, because they have to come through it from time to time. So it's in their interest to know to the millimeter how thick the ice is. So he was tracking that for 40 years. And his book was fairly, no holds barred. I mean, it really painted a very, very grim picture of what was happening in the Arctic and the implications of allowing it to continue unabated. And that was an epiphany for me. I was at a stage in my career where I had, I was able to, I did a lot of communication with, members of my team and teams that I'd run, what have you. And I'd had some, the opportunity to dabble with some software as well. And then I had this burning desire to sort of talk about these issues, because I couldn't find any more, or I couldn't find much more information that was in a language that I could absorb and understand easily without having to, trawl through a peer-reviewed scientific paper. And I thought, well, I can trawl through peer-reviewed scientific papers because I've got a degree and I'm a fairly intelligent guy. And I'm quite good at talking to people because I've had 30 years of talking to normal average people to get them to understand the what, how, and why of getting things done. Most importantly, the why. And so I thought I could make a difference. And that was really the motivation. So the original idea was for me to go on a journey to learn about climate change through various papers and things that I would read, and sort of take the viewer with me on that journey. And here we are 3 years later.
I love that. I love that it started as something you read and realized, and then the passion you wanted to go down led you to actually wanting to start sharing your information and your learning with other people. And I must say that you've done an amazing job with that. Your YouTube channel is great. Every video you put out is, there's a lot of information in it, and you do a really good job of creating graphs and charts and visuals for people who are a little bit slower like myself to actually follow along and actually see that this equals this, and here's why, and it's very informative, and I appreciate your work. So
thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, I mean, once you know this stuff, you can't unknow it. I know it's a cliche, but that really was the thing with me. Once it goes into your head and you see the implications of the way we're currently behaving as a civilization, you can't park it somewhere else. It's in your head. Yeah. So for me, that meant I had to voice that concern.
So let's talk about starting the YouTube channel and the first video, and the process of getting it going.
So that was about a 6 to 8 month process, actually, of starting more or less from scratch. I was obviously aware of YouTube, and I'd watched it as a viewer, as a consumer from time to time. But I suppose the process of getting enough confidence to set up, that's one thing. So it took me a long time to think about whether I was going to do it or not. And in that time, I was doing all this reading that I've just mentioned and trying to, coalesce all the thoughts into some sort of one single coherent video that really sort of set out the argument of why climate change shouldn't be ignored. And that process took about 6 months. And then learning the technicalities of YouTube, how to set up a YouTube page, and the intricacies of the algorithm, and what best to do, and whether your title should be this or your thumbnail should be that, and when to post and how often to post, etc., etc. So there was a lot of watching YouTube tutorials about YouTube.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, watching, finding as much YouTube content about the subject matter that I was hoping to produce. And as I say, a lot of it was just about, garnering the confidence to actually dive in and go public. At the age of 48, you think, well, is anybody going to want to listen to me? YouTube's put out there as a what it was very much as a sort of young person's thing. I think it's grown actually far past that now. And I think if you want to look at young person's things, you're looking at TikTok and Instagram and possibly Twitter, I suppose, but less so that. So that was a process. In the end, actually, the actual technicality of setting up a YouTube page is extraordinarily easy. I mean, it literally is. You just go on there, do what they tell you to do, and you've got a page, and you can start processing a video that evening, and off you go.
Yeah. So how has the response been? I know you have over 300,000 subscribers. Most of it good, or you've gotten a lot of backlash, a lot of hate?
No hate, I'm pleased to say. And I think it depends on the video. One of the things I don't do, or I try not to do, is to produce salacious, really deliberately unnecessarily provocative videos.
Thank you.
that could alienate half the population, because I think I was tempted at the start because I was very angry at the start, and I was very angry at a lot of leaders, and I did that. In fairness, I did produce 1 or 2 videos that directly had a pop by name at people like your previous president and and a couple of previous before him, and as well as UK leaders. And I very quickly realised that that's a fairly pointless activity, really. I'm not here to talk politics. I'm here to talk about the climate. And so I decided very early on to keep it to the subject matter in hand, and to make sure that it was civilized. I never cuss and swear in the videos. I never, pick at one individual person just to be provocative. I never try and do debunk videos because I know they're going to, poke sharp sticks into the sides of what you might call the opposition. I just try and present the facts as clearly as possible. So some videos present facts that people don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And yes, I get a lot of pushback on those. Most of the videos, if you're going to, the best way to sort of judge the feedback is on the likes, the number of likes, or the percentage of likes, let's say. The vast majority of the videos are 97% plus likes. And then there's a few outliers there's one in particular which was down at about 76% likes. And that's because it was about the grand solar minimum. And without getting too much into that subject, that's a whole subject matter that's particularly in America. There's a whole movement that believes strongly that the activity of the sun is the main driver of radiative forcing, as they say. That the change in the amount of solar radiation reaching the Earth is dictated by how active the sun is. It does have a slight change, does have a slight influence, but very, very, very tiny. Anyway, I did a video about that, basically saying it's not the grand solar minimum, it's not the sun, it is the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. There's no doubt the climate's clear, the science is clear, sort of get over it kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that got not only did it get nearly 1 million views, it also got a hugely mixed reaction. People saying, you don't know what you're talking about, and that sort of thing. But, one of the advantages of being 48 is I couldn't care less what people think of me. I've long since stopped caring about, I lost my hair when I was 30. So you stop caring about that point, to be honest with you. And so I don't care what people think of me. I'm finding science, peer-reviewed science that I believe to be true and correct, that nowadays is demonstrably correct by looking out the window.
Yeah.
And I'm presenting that science. And if people don't agree with it, that's up to them. They're free to express their views in the comment section. I never censor the comment section unless someone is absolutely horribly abusive, or if it's some spam comment coming in. But other than that, if people want to express their views, it's a free country over here and over there, and that's the way it should be. So I'm also free to disagree with them. So
yeah,
it's fine.
Well, and I think that's one of the things, right? It's sort of the core tenet of the show is that this is a dialogue, right? You're supposed to be sharing this information, and so it's only fair that people can, chip in their 2 cents, which are probably not as widely researched, but you never know who you get. And on occasion, maybe there's a bit of good information that would come in and maybe kickstarting another topic or another idea. And I think ultimately that's probably better. So
absolutely, and a lot of the comments threads take on a life of their own. To be honest, without me, there are lots of people dive in there, and it becomes a discussion thread that has a life of its own, as I say, and that's a good thing. I don't know how many minds are changed along the way, but it's an interesting debate, and I let people get on with that. Really, I don't really get I go in and look at the comments in the first 2 evenings,
Yeah.
And then in all honesty, I don't usually go back and look after that because I'm busy doing the next video, so I don't have the time.
Well, and you sort of mentioned that this is by design, but I think I just wanted to sort of comment that I really do like the fact that you take such a measured approach to this type of stuff, you know, especially given sort of the political climate in the last, I don't know, maybe even 10 or 20 years. When people start shouting about global warming or any of these sort of issues, you know, that are sort of these hot topics, you know, there's this impulse from most people that it's somebody telling you you're wrong and therefore you're upset about it. And so you're going to argue back. And, you know, even if on its face you could agree, okay, well, you know, temperature is getting higher, you know, whatever, like, you know, even if you could agree, you just don't because you're tired of being sort of yelled at or barked at by somebody. And I think the approach of so many people who are in this space talking about sustainable things and climate, especially, you know, do come at it from a little bit more controversial angle or a little bit more authoritarian view where it's, you know, you either need to believe this or you're one of those guys, you know, you're this kind of, you know, off on your own kind of person. And so I think the way that you approach this thing's, you know, very fact-based, but also even just in your delivery, the sort of measured approach, I think sort of reduces the heat in the kitchen. So it's a little easier to hear the message. Good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's certainly how it's meant to be, and it's good to hear that that's how it comes across. I think if you take the normal, what you call the bell curve, the normal distribution curve, then you know you've got at one extreme, let's say you've got fossil fuel propagandists and maybe pharmaceuticals and perhaps big agriculture, those sort of, you know, guys and the lobbyists in Congress and Parliament who are trying to hold us back, and at the other extreme end you've got activists like Extinction Rebellion and perhaps Greta Thunberg and you know others in your country who are doing good work in trying to pull us forward into what they see as a bright new world of sustainability and renewable energy. And in the middle, there is a vast rump of humanity who are just decent working folks who want to, you know, do a good job, earn their monthly salary, pay for the kids' food and clothes and school, and you know not get into trouble. And they don't really want to be concerned too much with what they see as these, you know, highfalutin ideas about how to change the world. They see that as someone else's job, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think, you know, most people are like that. They're just busy getting on with their lives, and as you say, Ryan, you come at them with some kind of dictatorial finger pointing and pious attitude about, oh, you're terrible because you drive a 4x4 and you know you've only got 2 kids and not 4 kids, or you know, or whatever, then people are going to reject that message. My view is that the majority of the work that needs to be done to mitigate climate change will need to be done by our governments anyway. There are plenty of things that individuals and communities can do, but browbeating them to do that when they see other things happening in the world is not going to get you very far, in my view.
Yeah. How long do you think you spend on each episode? Like research time and then production time? It's got to be a week or two.
It's a week. I do one a week, and each one takes me a week, whether I like it or not. So that means sometimes sometimes I'm working till 3 o'clock in the morning. I guess the average in terms of hours from the very start of researching a topic to posting it on YouTube it's probably between 60 and 80 hours, I would say. So a very complicated one can take longer than that. So it's full time, no question.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, have you, over the course of the, you know, development of your channel, I mean, obviously you've had a few that are just like, you know, massive successes, but even like an average video for you does pretty darn well. Have you come across anything that you would consider sort of like a big aha moment, or someplace where maybe your mind was changed, or your take on something was totally flipped by the research that you did for an episode?
Gosh, that's a very good question. I think in the early days that was certainly true. I was learning about subjects that you'd think would be, I suppose a lot of it is things that happen in the world that you think are environmentally friendly or greener than the alternatives, and then you research them and find out they're not necessarily as green as they might be. So hydroelectric dams, for example, you'd think you could say hydroelectricity is a zero carbon way of providing, you know, decent electric and large scale grid scale electrical supply for large areas. but you delve into it and you find that actually, dams destroy the habitats of downstream wildlife. They wreck the migration routes for fish and the breeding areas, etc., etc. And the standing water behind the dams tends to get stagnant and release lots of methane. For example, that's just one example. So not so good. And there's plenty of others like that, where you start looking at a technology that you go into thinking, I'm going to champion this technology, and then you read about it and realize that there's actually all sorts of underlying issues with it that make it sometimes no better than just burning fossil fuels, and sometimes even worse. And a recent video I did about blue hydrogen is a good example. Hydrogen, and you have to be careful not to tar everything with the same brush, because hydrogen has lots of good uses if it's produced in the right way. There are some industries like steel making and cement, and some big vehicles like ships and boats and what have you, and trains and what have you, that could benefit greatly from green hydrogen as a fuel source or an additive. But blue hydrogen produced from steam reforming methane is worse than just burning natural gas in the first place. So those are the sorts of things, I think, when you just think something's going to be good and then you realize it's not as good as it purports to be.
Yeah, no, I suspect that's something that happens, at least with some regularity as science gets better and technologies get more efficient and better. I imagine this has to happen sometimes. I mean, and I guess, we were talking earlier about sort of the dictatorial, finger wagging or whatever, to try and get people to choose the right path. But like, how much of this is still kind of unknown, so maybe we are championing the wrong things, but we just don't know. And then in 3 to 5 years or 10 years down the road, we find out, we killed some shellfish unbeknownst to us, and it turns out it was actually worse for us than the other, like, I guess, how does it feel, or how do we keep it from becoming this, we're all trying to do the right thing, and I guess being allowed to forgive ourselves when we screw it up, because like, if everybody's got the right motivation, then we're cool. But at the same time, there's plenty of things that we might champion because we grabbed onto one, grain of knowledge, and then, maybe we find out we're completely wrong in the future. So like, I guess, how do we tell them apart, I guess, what I'm trying to get at.
I mean, the boring, dull answer is that certainly the science is really clear. I mean, the science of climate change, at least, is absolutely unequivocal, as the IPCC said in their recent report. There's really no question in the scientific community about what's happening in the world and what's causing it. CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere are warming our atmosphere. They've already warmed it more than 1.2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And they will continue to warm, whatever we do, actually, for some time. But we're on a trajectory now to hit probably something between 3.7 and 5.4 degrees Celsius by the end of this century.
Wow.
And again, the science is clear about how catastrophic that kind of temperature rise is for the systems that we rely on as a species, and every other species rely on for our life, really. And so there's no question about that. I suppose the question mark is, what do we do, and what will be the implications of our actions from now on? Will there be any knock-on effects? And one of the biggest areas of contention there is geoengineering, which is purported by some people as being a very effective way to very quickly change the parameters within our atmosphere in a way that's beneficial to mitigating climate change. For example, seeding the atmosphere with particles, reflective particles in the upper atmosphere to reflect the sun rays back, a bit like the aerosols we've got in the atmosphere now from the pollutants that get up there. They are actually quite reflective, and you could fly planes across the world and deliver these sulfur dioxide particles out into the atmosphere, but then they react with the water and cause sulfuric acid to drop as acid rain. So you might help one thing, you might reduce the reflectivity slightly, but you may be causing other issues elsewhere in the world. And again, it's not that that's unknown. It's just that once you start messing with a dynamic system like our Earth systems, our atmosphere and carbon cycle and hydrologic cycle, and you start tinkering with that, it's very difficult to know with absolute certainty what you're going to do. What we can say with absolute certainty that reducing carbon dioxide from our atmosphere and methane and other greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide, will help. That's there's no question about that. It will reduce the rate of increase of temperature, and that can only be a good thing. We can say that certain technologies, wind and solar, will be effective at replacing gas and oil as energy generators. They already are. So those things are clear. So I think the vast majority of the really important stuff that we need to know about what to do is already clear. And there's some outliers that haven't been sort of started and trialed yet at any scale, but are still being championed by certain people. Those outliers are definitely questionable, and the only way you'll really know whether they work is probably to try them at scale. And that's why I think the world is rather reticent to dive down that rabbit hole in case it goes badly wrong. Because if it goes badly wrong with some of these geoengineering projects, once you've done them, they're very difficult to reverse, and then you've got some kind of knock-on effect going on, and you've opened Pandora's box, and that's something we need to really avoid.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to, just be a normal person in this scenario and say, hey, what is my, how can I affect this? How can one person make a difference? And, especially when, China or this company over here has just opened a new coal plant or, whatever. What do you have to say to someone that has that kind of mentality? Do you have any suggestion for the one person? What is my difference going to make?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is that looking at someone else's activities is a great way to cop out of doing anything yourself, quite frankly. And this is me sounding a bit pious and finger pointing now. I haven't said I shouldn't do that, but
I like it.
But it's a good way to say, well, there's no point in doing anything because look at this kid over there, or look at this country over there doing X, Y, and Z. And China's the obvious one to point fingers at. And that, in my opinion, that's defeatist. The idea that there's no point in me doing anything. If everybody had that idea, then nothing would ever get done, ever. We'd still be living in caves. Yeah. So the human spirit and the human evolution is all about people striving out and some individuals starting, maybe, early adopters, and then the rest of us catching up and catching on. And, it's an old cliche, another old cliche. I've got lots of them, so you'll get a lot of them tonight. But, you might say it's a drop in the ocean, but the ocean's made up of drops, and it's a truism. Yeah. So if you didn't have rain, you wouldn't have oceans, but each individual raindrop is a single, item effectively. So that's how I think of individual actions. It also gives you a little bit of it's also instructive, learning about the things you can do in your own life, thinking about your meat intake, looking at your energy provider if you have a home, and switching to a green energy provider, looking at your bank, looking at the investments they make. Do they make investments in fossil fuel industry? There are banks now that never invest in climate harmful projects. So get involved with them. Look at your pension scheme. You can do the same thing with that. Maybe putting solar on your house, obviously looking at an electric vehicle. If you must buy a car, then make sure it's electric, the next one. These things are instructive and good projects to have for yourself. And they make you kind of feel like you're making a contribution. And they also help you to talk to your friends and family about what you've already done and maybe inspire them to do the same. And that's how these things work. They snowball. Pointing at other countries, let's take China as an example, because it's obviously the elephant in most people's rooms. China have pledged to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. That seems a very long way away. But when you consider the juggernaut that China is, stopping that juggernaut and turning it around is a hell of a job. And Xi Jinping has said he'll do that. And that in itself is a minor miracle that we've got a leader in China who he understands the immediate danger that it's putting his population in. They're already experiencing some of the effects of climate change with droughts and floods, catastrophic droughts and floods. and catastrophic pollution in their cities. So he knows the scale of the issue. The other thing I'd say about China is that the reason, or part of the reason, they have such prodigious emissions is because we in the West stopped making a lot of the stuff we used to make and cut down our own carbon emissions and went and said, oh, look how good we are. And the UK is a good example. We went from being a mainly manufacturing-based economy 20 or 30 years ago to a mainly services-based economy today. But we still buy all of the things we used to buy, and we still consume way more, actually, than we used to consume. It's just we buy it all from China. So we parked our carbon emissions problem in China, and now we can point our finger at them and go, oh, look at them, terrible emissions. And then we buy all their products.
Yeah.
And ship in those carbon emissions, but our governments don't need to record them as actual emissions because they happen somewhere else. So, I think we need to be very careful when we start casting aspersions at other countries who produce a lot of goods that we buy, because we're just as culpable.
Yeah, it's a consumer mentality. It's I need this, I need this, I need this, and that really drives a lot of the problem.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of, you did a video on rethinking climate change, and essentially you broke down a report that someone put out that they focused on 3 categories: energy, transportation, and food. And you kind of broke it down, and you talked about the technology disruption that's inevitable, that's going to come. Can you maybe talk about that video? Tell us about those 3 categories and what technology disruption is, and is there any hope for us? I mean, is there? That's one thing I saw at the end of the video. I was like, hey, maybe we do stand a chance. Kind of, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these guys at Rethink X, I think the main 2 guys are Tony Sieber's a name that a lot of your listeners, I think, will have heard of. He's done a lot of presentations in the States. James Arbib is a UK guy who's the co-founder of Rethink X, who's the guy that I spoke to before I made the video. And they are both thought leaders. They're also both big investors, both very successful men in their own right. And they have and their colleagues have formulated, in my opinion, they haven't formulated some pie in the sky wish list. They've simply taken a hard-nosed look at what's happening in the markets today, and they've recognized disruptive technology that's actually happening today and will continue to happen in the next 10 years that will transform the way we consume products. A disruptive technology is one that comes in and is simply, almost always, simply better and cheaper than the present incumbent technology. So Kodak's a good example. It was slow to react on digital. The car's a good example. The car came in and people were in horse and carts, and they said, well, no one's going to want to drive a car. So, horrible, dirty, noisy thing. And, I've got my lovely horses, and the farriers were in business, and everyone that looked after horses, and, the people that raked up the horse manure from the streets, all these jobs were built around a horse and cart. And then in came these upstarts with these internal combustion engines in the cars and completely disrupted that industry. And all those jobs, all those people with those jobs had to reinvent what they did for a living. And that was very disruptive. So, and there's a classic photo of a New York street. I think it's 1903 to 1918, something like that. In 1903, the streets full of horse and carts with one car. And in 1918, the streets full of cars with one horse and cart. So within 15 years, that entire market had absolutely turned on its head. The same is happening with those, as you say, food, energy, and transport now. And in food's the least palatable of all of them. People hate talking about lab-grown meat and synthetic food, as you like to call it. But essentially, the technology for cultivating proteins from a single animal culture into tens of thousands of, let's say, burger patties, for example, or chicken nuggets. That's well underway. They can do it already, and the costs have come down from, I think the first burger that was ever shown on the first, lab-grown, cultured meat burger, shall we say, was something like $150,000 about 12 years ago. and now they're making them for $9 a piece.
Yeah.
And that price is still going down. So they're now in the realms of it being entirely an accessible product. And they have to go through, regulative procedures and make sure it gets signed off by the FDA and the various bodies in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that technology is it's going to be probably 10 times cheaper, 20 times less water, 20 times less land, all these massive implications for producing this new food, which will look and taste exactly like the animal protein that we eat. Well, I don't, but that other people eat today. So that's one thing.
And you actually broke down in that same video that the amount of land that they use to raise cattle right now and to have the meat that we eat is like 3 billion acres or some ridiculous amount. And then if we can reduce that by 20%, that land can be used as reforestation and actually help with the CO2 emissions.
Absolutely. It's the size of the contiguous states of America, Australia and China combined. Yeah. And you could literally free up that land and not do much with it. You could just let nature take over that land and let it rewild back into the way it was before we started messing about with it. And you would capture unbelievable amounts of carbon dioxide in that photosynthetic process. Essentially, plants would grow in whatever way was most conducive to that area. So nature would look after that. If trees were the most competitive species in a particular geographical location, then you'd get a forest. If they weren't, and it was grasses were most competitive, then you'd get a prairie, for example. But nature would work that out for itself, and nature comes back incredibly quickly when you give it a chance. We've all seen that. Not within decades; it's within weeks. Yeah. Nature's back in charge as soon as we get out of the way.
Well, and maybe this is a dumb or naive question, but where do we put all the cows? Are we talking mass slaughter? Do we let them roam the world? No. Like, what do we do with all these cows?
It's a perfectly reasonable question, and yeah, and it stems from this concept that we're going to flick a light switch and move from one technology to the. It's not quite going to be overnight. It's still going to take a decade. If you took the right measures now, you're not going to immediately make the world flip from eating beef to not eating beef. So you can run those stocks down is the answer.
If that makes sense, right? You could reduce breeding. You could reduce all the things you do now to keep up with the demand for beef at this point.
Yeah,
but so you have to reduce that as the one lifts, the other goes lower, and that sort of
correct.
Thing. That makes sense.
The massive caveat with that, and it's something that I have huge sympathy for, is that there are millions of incredibly hardworking farmers who are on their knees already, and your country has a large amount of them in your Midwestern area, and we've got a lot in Europe and in Ireland and the UK. They work extremely hard, and they are being absolutely crippled at the moment by terrible weather already, floods and frozen ground. I think in 2019, you guys had frozen ground from kind of January to about April, which wrecked 58% of the crop planting season. And then as soon as it thawed out and got warm, it just started raining, which wrecked the other half of the season. And so, there was a big reliance on reserves of grain and actually buying meat in from other countries into the United States. And those problems aren't going to go away. So I really feel for those farmers and those farming communities and those families. Some of them have been in their generations, and they're going to rightly say, what the hell am I going to do? And we need to support that, and we need to find ways.
And I suppose it wouldn't be all that different from your car and horse and buggy metaphor, right? I mean, like you evolve out of, I don't know, cattle raising, and raising the props the crops that go along with doing that. And then you'd transition into, whatever, do we need core or something for making whatever the food stuff of the future is going to be?
Hemp is a viable product that is being more widely accepted right now. And if they could go from growing, hay to hemp, now they have something they can sell that can take the place. There's always an alternative. It's just.
Well, and you made a really good point, even if you didn't mean to, or even if it's just because I'm sort of slow on the uptake. But there is this thing, and maybe it's, I kind of walked into my own trap, I guess, because there's there is this thing going on where we think everything is kind of that light switch, right? It seems to be that way with political discussion, seems to be that way with climate change discourse, all this stuff. I think maybe it's just how human brains are wired, or maybe, like I said, maybe I'm a little slow, but I think it's, something to do with, the way that I looked at it. Obviously, as our conversation went on, I went, oh, okay, well, that's where the cows would go, obviously. But my first impulse was, oh, well, if we turn it off overnight, my God, what do we do with millions, hundreds of millions of cows that are now roaming our city streets? So it's like, so it is interesting to explore this, that it's actually a transition.
Yeah, and we're conditioned to deal with absolutes as human beings. It's either black or white, and you see that in every walk of life. Human beings, that's how human beings like it. It's either dangerous or it's safe. It's either good or it's bad. It's either over there or over here. You're either one of us or you're one of them. This is how the human brain, in the emotional half of the brain, that's how the human brain works. And we all know the brain's in two halves. We've got an intellectual side and an emotional side. Critical thinking is in the intellectual side, and emotional thinking is your instincts. And, that's a lion, I'm going to run. That's bad. And that's where the good and bad comes from, the yin and yang, if you like. I know a lion's bad, so I'm running. I don't need to think about that too much. It's instinct. Whereas projecting forward and thinking about what could happen 17 steps down the line requires critical thinking on a level that most people don't bother with, frankly, because in their day-to-day lives, they don't need it. But that's what we do need to understand that in 10, 20, 30 years' time, if we carry on as we are in big, big trouble. And actually, that message was harder to get across 3 years ago when I first started. It's even easier, even now, even 3 years hence. Look at the way extreme weather events have increased just in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And I'll just make the last point about the farmers, because I don't want them to sound too doom and gloom. Hemp is a very good option, as you say, but actually a lot of farmers now are using agrivoltaics. They're actually getting solar panels, ground-mounted solar panels on their land, and making more money from that, selling energy into the electricity grid, than they were making from their land previously. So there are options, and that's a really, really fruitful one. If we got all the farmers in America who were losing land because they were running down their cattle stocks to just fill their land with solar panels or wind turbines.
We're seeing it a lot in Idaho. We're seeing a lot of wind turbines popping up along the I-5 corridor and 84 going into Washington. There's a lot of them, and that to me, it's promising. I like seeing them pop up. They might be an eyesore to some people, but to me, it looks great. It's beautiful because it's a renewable resource, and I love it.
And you've got a bunch of wind howling down from the north to south through the middle of your country, and you do well to use it, in my view.
Yeah. So technology disruption is there's a thing called the causal feedback loops, and if I understand it correctly, this is where like the old tech is going to get more expensive and the new tech is going to get cheaper. Therefore, by having it become cheaper, it's going to be adopted over the old tech. So like gas is probably going to go up. Car manufacturers are probably going to stop manufacturing combustion engines and going straight to electric vehicles just because of the cost versus reward. Do you see that being our saving grace? Really, is just the cost of everything is going to go down, so that's what's going to change everything for us.
If you look at it purely from market economics or market forces, then yes, I mean that's how market forces have always operated. And you're right; those feedback loops, you can either have a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle. The virtuous cycle for the developing disruptors is that they get a product that's better. So it starts being adopted by more consumers. That gives them economy of scale to build more and more of them, which means the price per unit drops. And that means that they can pass that cost benefit on to the consumer. So more consumers buy their products. And then they get more promotion. They usually get more incentives from governments as well, who get interested in their product because it's clearly popular. And that means they'll get voted for if they approve that product. And that's a virtuous circle, self-reinforcing virtuous circle that can lead to an exponential growth in that product's success. Conversely, the vicious cycle for the incumbent technology is that fewer people start buying their existing product, and therefore their economies of scale get worse. So they have no choice but to put the price per unit up because they're selling fewer units. That makes it less attractive for the consumer. The consumer buys less, and that goes round in a circle. And you've got a negative feedback loop there of that speeds up the demise of that producer, and that's also an exponential fall. So you've got these two crosses on a graph, one going rapidly up and the other one coming rapidly down. And that's what's happening with solar and wind. It's what's happening with electric vehicles. It's what's happening with battery storage, which is 10 times cheaper than it was 10 years ago. All these technologies that are proving themselves to be fit for purpose and carbon neutral or environmentally friendly, at least in usage. Public are realizing that they're a better way to go, and in a lot of cases they're actually a better product. Battery energy storage, for example, reacts more quickly than gas peaker plants to frequency regulation, which is this thing where the electricity supply, the demand goes up, and the electricity supply has to provide that energy immediately because that's how electricity works. And if it drops a little bit, you can get brownouts, and if it goes up, you can get melted wires and things. And you need gas peaker plants traditionally to whir into action very quickly and compensate for those spikes in demand. Lithium-ion batteries can do that much more quickly and much more accurately than gas peaker plants can. So they're actually better at what they do, and now they're cheaper.
Yeah.
So it works itself out in market forces. But it works itself out even without government subsidy or this. I mean, fossil fuels still get $500 billion of subsidy every year in tax breaks, but even without any subsidies on a level playing field, the market sorts it out. And I'm not a rampant free market capitalist. I'm much closer to a socialist at heart, but I recognize the reality of the world, and the world works that way. And if we want to make some changes very quickly, then my view is you need the markets to come to the party.
So in the U.S., it's illegal to collect rainwater. It's you can't have your own power grid with more than like 4 or 5 homes. You have to be tied into the city's grid. How do we get politics out of the way to let us actually save our planet?
Well, that is the $64 million question, isn't it? And I think you can't get politics out of the way. That's the answer. You can't. You need to get the bad actors in politics out of the way, many of whom aren't even in politics. Most of them are lobbyists.
Yeah.
You need to get them out of the way, frankly. You need to reduce the power of influential lobbyists on Congress people and senators, or lawmakers and senators in Congress, and the same in the UK Parliament. It's not so bad over here in Europe, but it exists. Of course, lobbying exists everywhere in the world, the way to do that, in my opinion, is to have brave leaders who are not transfixed with whether or not they're going to be voted into power next term, but are actually driven by what's right for the species living on this planet and what's right for their populations in the longer term. And I think those leaders are starting to crop up. They're fighting a very difficult fight, and there obviously are a lot of leaders in other countries who are going in the opposite direction and becoming more inward-looking, more nationalistic, and more authoritarian, who are acting as a brake on progress. And COP26 will be a good leveler in Glasgow in November this year, when all those nations, 193 or 4 of them, whatever it is, come together and have to declare what's called the nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, towards mitigating climate change. And that's to say what they say their nations will do to reduce their own carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions over what period of time, and exactly what positive impact in terms of reduction of carbon emissions that will have. And those need to be legally binding this time around, and there'll be nowhere to hide, because anyone that comes with an NDC that's inadequate will be very quickly found out. And I can think of countries, I won't name them, but I can think of countries that probably will fall short. America won't be one of them. I think Mr. Biden's ambition, at least, is very real, and if it comes to fruition, then it will be transformational for the United States of America. And if we can transform the United States of America, I think the rest will follow.
Yeah, I sure hope so. I hate seeing what we've done and the harm we've caused and feeling hopeless. I don't like that thought. I would like to think that it's obvious enough right now that we need to start making changes, and we can't keep doing what we're doing. And
well, the quick hopeful message is that at the last count, more than 60% of people surveyed in America believed that climate change was an urgent issue, and they were either concerned or alarmed about it. So you have the majority, and 23 states, even when Mr. Trump pulled your country out of the Paris Agreement, 23 or 24 states said, no, we're not coming out. We're gonna carry on. We're still in. So most of the, I know that's not half the states, but I'm sure there's more now. Most of your population, the majority, understand the issues and are very, very willing to change and to look for the solutions that will help. So I think you're pushing an open door. You just need the political will. And I think Joe Biden, maybe because he's got nothing to lose, because he's 78 and he may not even bother trying for the next election. He knows he's got probably 2 years to the midterms to really make a difference. And he's going for it. So all power to his elbow.
Yeah, I agree. So I wanted to just touch on one more thing before we get out of here. And it's just sort of the broad array of topics that you cover. And so Mike just mentioned something about feeling sort of hopeless or like we can't personally or individually, do that much because we're beholden to the politics or whatever. How do you decide, I guess, as it pertains to your channel and just in general, where to focus your energy, right? I mean, each of us only have so much bandwidth. Each of us only have so much time, money, resources, energy, life force to dedicate to certain things. And, a little bit in each bucket is probably a good thing. But how do we decide where to put our focus, or how best to use our time, whether it's, improving our systems or whatever? And then how does that relate to the topics you choose for your channel?
Well, you can't do everything, but you can do something. And you can focus on the most important thing at any given time. So my rationale for looking at videos to cover is generally which one looks like it could be the most impactful if it came to fruition. If I'm looking at technology, for example, which technologies am I reading about this week that look like they are realistic and could make the biggest impact? And I tend to focus on those. Rather than there are thousands of technologies being developed around the world, most of them in laboratories at tiny scale to prove a kind of concept, but whether that could be scaled up or not into production volumes is highly debatable in most cases. So I don't always succeed, but I try and focus on technologies that are quite a long way down the development road already and have started proving some figures at a large scale. And look like they could be, if they were adopted properly, could make an actual proper, we're talking things that could take millions of tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, not tens of tons. Those are the sorts of technologies that I'm interested in. Energy storage is a big one. Obviously, wind and solar I've covered, but electric vehicles is another one. And then in terms of the videos that talk about the issues, it's hard to choose which one of those is more important than another because they're all pretty catastrophic, to be honest, if we let them get out of hand. So I've on the 3-year journey, I've tried to make sure I've learned about all of the major issues and covered every single one of them. And that's a more systematic, there's 25 things and I just have to run through them sequentially. You can't, because again, you can't do them all in one video. So you just have to be patient. And do them one by one and trust that people can go back and either binge watch or watch each of them. The good thing about YouTube is they're on there forever. Yeah. But I would really counsel people not to lose hope. It can look hopeless. And there's a lot of people in the world that are doom mongers that and they're, I'm sure we all know who they are. Some of them have become quite popular. It's almost a movement to be a doom monger and say, well, nothing we can do now. We've gone too far. Just, make peace with whoever your God is or higher power, learn to love your neighbor and enjoy the ride because we're all going to die in 10 years. And that's such a defeatist attitude, and it's a wrong attitude, and it's not backed up by the science. The science doesn't say we're going to be extinct in 10 years. It doesn't say we're going to be extinct in 100 years. Might not be extinct in 1,000 years. It does say we've got a very, very significant existential crisis, but it also points out that there are very, very clear avenues for fixing that crisis. So there is hope, and without hope, there's nothing at all. So sitting down and giving up is an absolutely sure way of failing. Standing up and doing something at least means you're putting one foot in front of the other, and you're making an effort to get towards a successful conclusion. I was a project manager for years and years, and my job, when you get to the middle of a tunnel, you can't see the light at that end and you can't see the light at the other end, and you're in a darkness that feels hopeless. My job as a project manager was to get building site people to understand the size of the prize at the end of the tunnel, and there was light there, and drag them there when they were feeling hopeless in the middle of the project. And that's where we're at the moment. We're in the middle of the project, if you like. Some people can't see the light at either end of the tunnel. My job, if you like, and many others like me, is to point out that there is light, and we just need to focus on it and get ourselves there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And, I think, like, to Mike's point, I mean, myself and, others I know, I mean, it does feel overwhelming, right? Because there's so many things, and it is a challenging time too, just in the sheer amounts and volume of things being published across social media and everywhere else, and you never know who to turn to or who you can trust, or whatever. You'll have somebody advocating for one particular technology because that's the one they make. It's not that it's actually the best technology,
Yeah.
And so it really is difficult. And I guess the point is, though, as long as you're making an effort, or you're at least putting that one foot in front of the other, like you said, then you're at least working towards something. That doesn't mean you may start chasing a technology and then need to pivot because you were mistaken, or you learn something new, or something better comes along. But rather than sitting back and just doing nothing at all, at least working towards some solution, even if it's the wrong one, might at least your heart's in the right spot.
Absolutely, that's how human progress has been throughout the whole of time. Is trying something, it either works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't work, you try something else. Yeah. And that's how we're built. We're built to strive.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for making time for us. I know it's late, probably where you're at, and we really appreciate your time. Can you maybe tell people where they can go and to find your videos and reach out to you if they have questions?
If you go to YouTube and type in "Just Have a Think" in the search engine, you'll find me there. And my videos are also at my website, which is justhaveathink.com. So it's nice and easy. And that's it. I don't really do social media other than that, to be honest, because I'm old and crusty. So
Yep. That's right. So, we fellow old and crusty people appreciate it, and it works out great. So okay. Cool. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Dave. This has been great, and I really appreciate you making the time to do this. It's been eye-opening, and I really appreciate sort of the positive or upbeat take, right? Because it's pretty easy to get beat down by the negative information in the news or wherever else. And so I like to hear sort of the fresh take or the optimistic outlook.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, and great to meet you both too.
Yeah.
Yep. And thank you so much to everybody who's tuned into the show this week, every week, and continues to support us as we go. Check out Dave's website, and we'll see you all next time.